take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that. Spitting slow, spitting fast. I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past. And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness. Hilarious, you think you're with my time, you're delirious. Mysterious, because you hide behind a fake exterior. Inferior, you know I'll always be a bit superior. Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag. I want you to hear words, you can say them back. I want you to feel free from the chains that last, and to believe in what you got, it was built to last, yeah. Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help. I had to do it all myself.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
All right, y'all, we're here. We're live. You're watching Buster Unmasked, and you just seen the teaser. Get ready, Memphis, Tennessee, September 21st. Kick-Ass Wrestling returns. Look, guys, got a special show tonight, man. My guest tonight, he is a wrestler. He's a comedian, and he's a podcaster. And tonight, it's all about the Retro Wrestling Review Podcast with Gene Jackson. Gene, how's it going, man?
Hey now. Going good, man. How are you?
Doing pretty good, dude. Doing pretty good. I can tell you that. Look, man. USWA 1993 Retro Review Wrestling Podcast. Talk to me a little bit about it.
Man, you know, I started out, you know, I'm a part of the WrestleCopia brand over at WrestleCopia.com, and me and Ray Russell, we're having a lot of fun doing a series they have over there called Regional Wrestling, where we were covering Memphis in 1985. And, you know, we go through and watch the TV each week. And we talk about the TV. We talk about the Monday night cards and all the cards surrounding it. And we're just having a really great time doing it. And, you know, I've always been a fan of, you know, the 90s Memphis USWA era. And, you know, if you look around on the internet, there's a lot of podcasts dedicated to 80s Memphis wrestling.
Right.
A lot of them. And quite frankly, 90s USWA era just doesn't get as much love. There's not a lot of podcasts dedicated to it. And I thought, you know, there really should be. And I was talking to some buddies of mine, and it's like, well, if you want one, why don't we make one? Like, you know, if there ain't any out there, why ain't we doing it? So,
right.
You know, we kicked it around for a little bit and tried to decide the best. You know, USWA, you know, kicked off in 1990 in reality. But if we're going to say reality, 1990 USWA, not the best,
Right.
if we're being honest. It's not going to hook people to a new podcast. There's some good stuff in 91 and 92, but let's be honest, 93 is when, as good old JR would say, business really started to pick up. You know,
Right.
you start having these WWF guys coming into town. And just the surreal aspect of, you know, here we are in the TV5 studio in Memphis that we've all known and loved for all these years. And yeah, some of the most famous wrestlers in the world have come through there. But seeing Lex Luger in 1993 in the Memphis studio, standing alongside Dave Brown,
Right.
and Doink the Clown in there pulling his shenanigans, and the Giant Gonzalez teaming with Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett as a babyface just mere weeks after attacking the Undertaker at the Royal Rumble. There was just a lot of fun stuff there, so I decided let's kick it off in 1993. I got my co-hosts. My regular co-hosts are going to be Josh Briley and Richard Mulligan of P3 Radio. A lot of the people in the area are real familiar with them. A couple of really funny guys. You know, Richard used to be involved in wrestling. He wrestled in Memphis during the Corey Macklin wrestling area. You know, he was Max Corbin. And then, of course, Josh Briley is the nephew of Nightmare Danny Davis, who was very prominent in not only 1993 USWA, but just USWA in general.
Right.
So they're my regular co-hosts, but there's going to be times that, you know, they've got other things going on. And I'm going to be tagging in some other surprise guest co-hosts that are going to come in and have some fun with us. Not to mention some special guests that have already reached out and said, hey, man, I'd like to come in and talk about my time at the USWA. So we got some fun stuff coming, Buster, and I appreciate you having me on to talk about not only that, but all kinds of great stuff tonight. So once again, thanks for having me, man, and it's great to be here.
Dude, it's my pleasure to have you. It's a cool concept, dude. I like it. I dig what you're saying, and I'm with you. 90, 91, 92. I think y'all did right by starting with 93, man. I think it's lot going on during that year in USWA. Like you said, you got all the influx of these big stars coming in from WWF. Let me ask you something. Was that the same year that Vince came down?
I mean, a lot of people, and I hope a lot of people watch the podcast because, and I say watch because, you know, it's kind of a choose your adventure podcast. You can listen to it audio wise and you can still follow along.
Right.
We play a lot of clips, but we've also got a video version. So you can watch the video version. So you can either watch the clips or you can hear the clips. But it's going to be a lot of fun, but it's also, you know, there's going to be some learning going on for people who aren't familiar, younger people who weren't around back then. And I think a lot of young fans don't realize that the Mr. McMahon, who famously fought with, you know, who screwed Bret Hart and fought and was born in Memphis in USWA. The very first time the world got to lay eyes on a heel Vince McMahon was right there on TV5 on USWA television. And we will be talking a lot about that this coming year on the Retro Wrestling Review podcast.
Yeah, man, it was a big deal. I had just started wrestling, just started early 93. I started training in mid 92, early to mid 92, started wrestling at the end of 92. Really just starting in the business during all this. And man, I don't think people realize how big a deal it was for Vince McMahon to not only show up on, be seen on Channel 5 TV, but show up at the Mid-South Coliseum. Like you said,
absolutely.
That is here's my theory. Memphis Wrestling has always been the predecessor to sports entertainment, Vince McMahon Sports Entertainment. And 1993, Vince McMahon, USWA, predecessor to Mr. McMahon that we all know and love or hate, depending on how you look at it, man.
Vince McMahon, as a rule, didn't acknowledge wrestling existed outside of the WWF. And then all of a sudden, he is sitting ringside for a Jerry Lawler match at the Mid-South Coliseum. And so, yeah, man, that's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. I'll tell you another fun one people forget about that we've got coming up even sooner than the Vince. We got to see heel Howard Finkel feuding with Downtown Bruno in Memphis. And Howard had a ball doing that because, you know, Howard was – he's not only a great wrestling announcer, but he was a wrestling historian. He was the guy for Vince McMahon that watched all the territories. He gathered up all the tapes. He scouted all the talent from around the country and around the world, and would keep Vince and Bruce and all these guys kind of in the loop and in the know of what was going on. And so for him to be able to come to Memphis and portray his version almost of like the Andy Kaufman heel character,
right?
You know, he had a blast, man, and it's really fun to watch.
And him and Bruno, man, that's like a match made in heaven.
Oh, for sure.
Right there, man. A lot of people don't remember none of that stuff, and like you said, man, it's a good eye-opener it's a good learning experience. It'll definitely be a good learning experience to these younger kids who didn't grow up, wasn't even alive during that time to see some of these things and realize, hey, that dude I loved in the Attitude Era started right here. Like you said, Lex Luger at the Coliseum. The Jeff Jarrett thing, where Jeff Jarrett actually went to the WWF, went to the Pyramid, I think it
Yeah.
was. Was that 93 too?
I think that was in '92. It had happened
92.
like tail end of '92, probably like October of '92, because they do reference it a few times throughout '93. But yeah, because that's kind of where that all kicked off. Jeff
Exactly.
shows up at the Pyramid. He challenges Bret Hart, who was Intercontinental Champion at the time, and that's kind of where this whole WWF USWA working relationship, from a kayfabe perspective, that's where it all started right there. So. Yeah, man, I'm not saying we won't circle back and cover 91 and 92 down the road somewhere, because there's a lot of good stuff there too. The Moondogs feud with, Jarrett and Lawler and Jarrett and Robert Fuller and
Right.
things like that. But, man, there's just so much that goes on. I mean, you got heel Bret Hart coming to Memphis as a heel, which, he was a baby face in the WWE. Owen coming to town as a heel.
Right. Owen too, yes.
Papa Shango's passing through. Just you never knew at that time. Razor Ramon, you never knew who from the WWF was subject to pop up in the USWA, and you could usually count on they were going to be playing the opposite role of what they played on WWF TV, because the King was playing the opposite role. He was the bad guy on WWF TV, but he was a good guy on Memphis, and somehow he made it make sense. Even as a kid in '93, I didn't question it. I didn't ask like, well, why was the King a bad guy on WWF? He's a good guy here.
Right.
It made sense to me. I didn't question it or have a problem with it.
Well, I think for anybody around here that grew up on Jerry Lawler, I mean, we understood it from the get go, just because Jerry Lawler's been our hero. He's been our hero most of our whole lives, and I'm like you, I never questioned it, or it wasn't out of place. And actually, during that time, man, I used to get to go to the Coliseum, and I'd sit up top and watch. Pretty much most of that whole '93. Definitely Vince McMahon, Owen Hart, Bret Hart coming, Lex Luger, all these different guys, man. And it was a big deal. And when you think about it, Jeff Jarrett going to the Pyramid was somewhat the predecessor to ECW showing up on Raw. It was kind of the same thing. And it was, Jeff did it first,
A lot of things that people saw later on that they thought they were seeing for the first time, the waters had already been tested in Memphis. It had already been done in Memphis. We knew it works now, so we'll rehash it again. But, almost everything in one form or another in wrestling originated in Memphis in some shape or fashion. So, that's another fun thing going on right now in January, the shows we're currently reviewing. You have got the Bruise Brothers, the Harris twins, are feuding over the USWA Tag Team titles with babyface Moondogs.
Right.
You find Spike and Spot in the unfamiliar role as babyfaces, along with Richard Lee, taking on the Moondogs and Mike Samples and Burt Prentice. And, this is before the Harris brothers became biker guys and, brothers of just
the Blue brothers and
whatever the hell all they did go on to be.
Right.
So this was early in their career, not as early as when they were there in '88 and they looked like a pair of twin Brian Lees. But they had no tattoos in their heads. They had the long hair. So it's something to see.
I really remember that during '88, '89, '90, even '91 too. I was out on the. I was a teenager, and
yeah,
I wasn't at home. If I was at home on Saturday mornings, I still passed out for Friday night usually.
There you go.
So if I didn't record wrestling, I didn't get to see it then. But a lot of stuff, man. I believe that too. Like I said, damn near everything that's ever been done in wrestling, I think was tried out here or done here first. Pretty much all of it, man. And there's a lot of history here, man, that people don't know about, dude. Speaking of history, man, like I said, opened up with, you're a wrestler, you're a comedian, a podcaster. So look, let's kind of backtrack just a little bit and tell me how Gene Jackson got in the wrestling business, man. Even farther, tell me how you fell in love with wrestling, discovered it, and then kind of tell me how you got in this business, dude.
So, as a kid, I wouldn't say my dad was a huge wrestling fan, but he watched quite a bit of wrestling. And I would be in the room, and he'd be like, "Hey, look at this, look at King Kong Bundy, or whoever was on screen." And I can just remember kind of, coming in, sitting down. Somebody like the Road Warriors would catch my eye, or Dusty, Piper,
Right.
and I'd watch a little bit of it. And then I'd go back and play with my trucks and cars and stuff, and GI Joes or whatever. And I was just kind of watching it in passing. And then I remember distinctly around WrestleMania 2 in like 1986 is when I really locked in on it, and became a huge fan of Continental, because I grew up in Mississippi. I grew up in North Mississippi, in Aberdeen, just between Tupelo and Columbus. And so I locked in on Continental and Memphis. I mean, I liked everything at that point, man. I was born in '77, so I'm like 8, 9 years old,
Right.
and I just liked wrestling. Like, I didn't just distinguish between good, bad, or I like this more than the other. If it was on and I could find it, I was watching it.
Same
But
here, man. I was
but
the
there
same
was
way.
something about Memphis and Continental that I liked best, because they would come to the area and I could go see that live. So I was a big fan of the Bullet, Bob Armstrong, and Continental, and the Nightmares, and Wildcat Wendell Cooley. And then on Memphis, I was a huge fan of Lawler, Bill Dundee, Jeff Jarrett when he came along, and that's just kind of where I got hooked there. And as the years rocked on, I was a huge fan of Roddy Piper. To this day, top top five favorite wrestlers, I always got to include Lawler, Roddy Piper, Dusty Rhodes. I'd say probably to round that out. The last couple I always have a hard time narrowing it down. I was a big Bret Hart fan.
Right.
Uh, really liked
See,
Bret.
I'm the
And
same way, man. I was a huge Bret Hart fan, dude. I mean, here's the thing. I'm like you. If it was on, I watched it, and I'll be honest with you. I don't, truthfully, I don't know that I had favorites, man. Obviously you
yeah,
had certain wrestlers you wanted to whoop other wrestlers, but at the same time, man, I just loved wrestling. Once I was hooked to it, I was hooked to it, man.
but I do remember being a big fan of Lawler early on, and that was one of the first wrestlers I got to meet. And so that, like, I remember getting my mom taking me to a car lot in Tupelo right after Lawler had beaten Kurt Hennig for the AWA title, and he was there at the Toyota dealership, and he had the AWA title belt there. And as like an 11-year-old, that was just the greatest day of my life. I got to hold a belt and take a picture
Right.
with the king and all this. And I was hooked right then. And I used to say when I was a kid, I want to be a wrestler. I want to be a wrestler. But I'm like, I'm not athletic. I'll never be able to be a wrestler. And so when I was in college, and I was taking like auto body classes and stuff, and I heard that Bill Dundee had a wrestling school in Jackson, Tennessee, and I got a hold of the phone number. And I called the phone number, and Bill Dundee answers, and I was like, "Yeah, I'd like to train to become a wrestler." And he asked me a few questions. He's like, "Well, you need $3,000." And I was like,
Right.
"Whoa, I'm in college. I don't have $3,000." Well, the dream's dead. so, so that kind of went away for a while. And I finished college, and I found these shows that were going on around Columbus and Tupelo, and there's a lot of local guys nobody would really heard of. But then the shows in Columbus, this radio DJ was putting them on, and he had like Davey Rich on the card, and Steve Armstrong, and Tommy Lane, and a few of these guys from like Memphis and Continental I'd heard of.
Right.
And I asked him, I was like, "How do I get in the business?" Because I want to be a manager. I was like, "Yeah, I can talk shit with the best of them." I don't know. Can we cuss on here? I don't know what the deal
Yeah,
is.
yeah, dude, you're good.
I was like, "Yeah, I can talk shit with the best of them, but again, I'm not going to be athletic enough to actually wrestle." I said, "How do I become a manager?" And one of the wrestlers was like, "You gotta have a manager's license." And so I go to another show, and I find another wrestler. I'm like, "Hey man, how do I get a manager's license?" They're like, "Well, you got to see the athletic commissioner." I'm like, "How do I find them?" They're like, "Remember Sammy Hall that was in like that fourth match?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like,
Right.
"He's the athletic commissioner. Track him down." And of course, he was the big heel, so it was kind of hard to track him down. But I finally called him after a show, and I'm like, "Hey man, I need to get." This is how big of a mark I was. I'm like, "Hey man, I need to get a manager's license." He's like, "Are you trained?" I'm like, "Trained to what?" And he's like, "Manage." And I was like, I've been watching this shit all my life. Like, I don't need, I think I understand how to manage. He's like, I don't think you do. And I was like, well, what do I need to do? He's like, well, you need to learn most of the same things to manage as you would to wrestle.
Right.
And I was like, well, all right. Well, do you know anybody that does any training? He's like, I do, up around Fulton. And he gave me the address to this location. He was training some guys. And I showed up there, and he had about, I don't know, 8 or 10 guys he was training at the time. And I was way bigger than any of them. And so he's like, well, get in the ring. And so they had me take a few bumps. And Sammy gives me a monkey flip out of the corner. And he takes me outside, and he's like, do you want to do this? I'm like, yeah, man, I want to manage. He's like, look. He's like, you're bigger. He's like, how are you going to manage guys and you're bigger than any of them? He's like,
Right.
you need to wrestle. I was like, well, if you think I can do it, yeah, I would love to. And he's like, well, you took all the bumps you needed to take. He's like, do you want to do it? I'm like, yeah, but I ain't got $3,000. He's like, who the hell said anything about $3,000? I was like, Bill Dundee. And he's like, Bill Dundee. And I was like, never mind. And so
let me shut up, man.
I was like, nothing. But I was like, yeah, I don't really have any money. He's like, I haven't asked you for any money. He said, just show up every week. We'll talk about that later. And so I started showing up every week, started training. After I trained for a while, he would have us come to the shows and set up the ring and, do all the stuff you do when you're breaking in. But from that day forward, that was the first and last time me and Sammy ever discussed money. He trained me. He broke me in the business, and I never paid him a dime. Kind of had my first match by accident. I was doing security, and somebody no-showed, and they come and
That's
got
how
me.
it happens, like, man, right there.
Hey, man, go to your car and get some music and come up with a name and put this mask on. Okay. And first match, I come out, I wore a mask, and I called myself the War Machine because of Ray Traylor and the War Games in 1987, and because the only tape I had was Kiss with the song War Machine on. And that name stuck for 10 years probably. And that's how I got in, was through Sammy. And, I never really got to a significant level. I thought I was a great wrestler at the time. Looking back in retrospect, I was never very good, but, I wrestled around Mississippi and tagged with Neil Taylor for a long time and worked with, Tony Dabbs, and eventually I went up to Corinth, and, me and Alan Steele and Johnny Dodson was a little trio up there in Corinth for quite a while, and had a lot of fun working with those guys. And of course, eventually what became the Power Pro guys and everything. And then I moved off to Alabama and finally got around to doing more of the managing and everything. And I'll say I was a wrestler in theory, but I know my place. I understand what I was and what I did and the significance or lack thereof. I've done more in wrestling as a podcaster than I did as an actual in-ring wrestler or manager or any of that. But I had a good time and learned a lot about the business. I've always, since I was a little kid, I've studied it. Every book I get a hold of, every video, everything I could ever study, I've always studied it. I started doing wrestling podcasts in 2007. Back when there was like 3 of us doing them, before everybody ever drew a fucking breath in their life has got a podcast now. And I mean, that's fair.
30 million of them out there, dude, man. Sometimes I don't even know why I do this shit, man. I'll be honest with you, man. It's just so many.
I get fed up, and I was like, why am I doing this? Nobody gives a shit, and I'll stop, and then I'll find a new angle, and I come up with something. And I do. That's why I kind of like this new podcast we're doing, because it's something different. And I feel like it's kind of, preserving and telling the history of Memphis wrestling and USWA and things like that. So.
I think there's an audience there for it, man. There's a million guys my age. I'm 50 now. So there's a million guys my age, anybody from probably 35 to my age and even older after that we're interested. That's what we're interested in, because that was that was a big part of our growing up and USWA, man, was huge. Of course, I've been watching wrestling. I don't even remember not watching wrestling as long as I can remember. And I started with Channel 5 wrestling, and then would watch anything that come on, like you said. I was in a lucky enough place where I could get Channel 5, I could get TBS, Georgia Championship Wrestling. For a while, I could get Bill Watts UWF out of Little Rock.
Oh yeah.
Every so often, the Little Rock station would actually play World Class out of Texas. So I'd get it too. And obviously, when the USA Network hit, WWF showed up,
Right.
but I like it, dude. It's a built-in audience, I think, and there's a lot of interesting stuff that's went on through these years, man. Like you said, there's everybody that's ever been anybody in wrestling through the 70s, 80s, and 90s came through Memphis.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just as simple as that, man. But like I said, you're a wrestler, but you're also a comedian, and that's what that interests the hell out of me. Hold on, Gene. Let me get to Mark. Mark McGee's with us. He said, hell, I'd watch. Let me get the original comment. Good evening, y'all. Mark, good evening, dude. I'm glad you're with us.
Mark.
He come back. He said, hell, I'd watch. And I mean, Gene can tell you where you can catch this at here in just a minute. Buster Legends like us been watching wrestling since we left the wound. And dude, I don't remember not knowing wrestling. But comedian, man, I'm assuming wrestling led you to comedy, or what? Or was that always something you had an interest in too?
Well, yeah, as a kid, I had two interests. So I was a weird kid that I didn't give a shit about sports. I didn't care about football or any of that kind of stuff. I played baseball. But I didn't care about watching baseball. But I liked wrestling. It's funny, you said that a minute ago about out of the womb and everything. Like I can remember, like as a kid, before VCRs were a thing, but we didn't have one until I was
Right.
probably like 13 or 14. So I'm like, if my mom wanted me to go somewhere, we had to plan the day around, in the morning, you had that TBS, wrestling in the morning.
Right.
Then you had Memphis at 10. And then you had, 6:05 or 5:05 for us in the central time zone. You had, WTBS shows. And so, and I can't tell you how many times my mom would go, the world doesn't revolve around wrestling, Gene, like through my entire childhood. But when I wasn't watching wrestling, I did enjoy, I loved staying up and seeing when the stand-up comedians would be on the Tonight Show. I remember on Cinemax, and this isn't a popular thing to say in 2024, but I'll say it. I remember on Cinemax, it seemed like every other day, Bill Cosby himself, a comedy special back then, would come on.
Right.
And I watched that. I could quote that word for word as a kid. And I remember thinking, even at a young age, going, man, this guy gets paid. Like my dad has to get up and go to work and sell tractors every day. My mom goes to a bank. This guy sits on a chair on stage and just tells funny stories and is a millionaire. Like, how do you sign up for that? But I got, once I got my foot in the door of the wrestling business, as much as my pinky toe was wedged in, I kind of lost track of that and got down the rabbit hole of wrestling. But when I married my first wife, she hated wrestling, and we moved off to Alabama. And every time I wanted to go do something that involved wrestling, it would be a big fight. We'd fight for a week before the show. We'd fight for a week after the show.
Right.
But she liked comedy. So I thought, you know what? Maybe I need to pursue this because at least then I don't have to fight with her about it. So I started going and doing open mics at the Stardome in Birmingham and doing some open mics like over at Comedy Catch in Chattanooga and some different places. And she enjoyed that. So it was something we didn't have to fight about. And that's also around the time, that was like 2006. And then that's also around the time I started doing podcasts. Well, prior to podcast, I was going and doing comedy, and to scratch the wrestling itch, I was writing for at one time Hollywood Jimmy Blaylock's what originally was just HollywoodJimmy.com. It eventually would become Wrestling News Center. And then
I
also
remember
wrote
that now, dude.
for
I
Brian
remember.
Trammell's Wrestling Riot Online, and I was a writer for that as well. And then eventually that spun into Cheap Heat Radio because my columns at the time was called Cheap Heat. And I had Cheap Heat Radio, which became the podcast where I was doing interviews. And the great thing back then, man, like I said, it was like 4 of us doing podcasts. Most people didn't know
Right.
what a podcast was. So I was getting some big names on there because there wasn't 5 million podcasters hitting these guys up every day wanting to talk to them. So I would just send an email and explain what the podcast was, and they'd be like, okay. And I mean, I interviewed guys like Jim Cornette and Jimmy Hart. I got to interview Bruno Sammartino, which that was
Oh
kind of an
wow.
arranged thing by Sal Corrente. But I got to interview some really big names back then. It was really cool. Uh, but I mean, you asked about the comedy. So that's kind of how I got, started in comedy. And I did that off and on, but with the job I had, it was really hard to find time to do it. So it was just one of those things where I would do it a handful of times a year there for a while. And eventually I got to where I really didn't do it at all. And here I guess about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided that I was completely done trying to be involved in the wrestling business. I was done managing, was done wrestling, and I was going to lean into the comedy. So I invented a character that I was doing. We won't even go into all that tonight, probably not in detail. But I started going. There's a comedy club about 30 minutes from where I'm sitting right now, where I live. And I started going. That guy liked me, and he's like, "Man, you can come down here anytime you want." So I had a stage that I could hit every weekend if I wanted to, Friday and
That's
Saturday
good.
night. So I started hitting the stage almost every weekend. I would do one night as this Whitey Jenkins character. I'd do one night as Gene. So I was kind of doubling up on material. I started building a set, 2 different sets, which was kind of unusual for most people. And I was still dipping my toe back into wrestling. I would get a call from, somebody over in Mississippi and be like, "Hey man, you want to come do this show?" And I would go over there and, I'd wrestle as Gene Jackson, or I would manage. And, I went and did EPW some because, Neil and Gary are my buddies, and
Right.
would still be involved like that. And then, you said you're 50. I'm right behind you. I'm 46. I'll be 47 in July. And so I finally decided about 2 years ago, year and a half, 2 years ago, I was like, okay, physically, I cannot continue to try to get in the ring and do this stuff. So I kind of swore it off completely and really, really doubled down on the comedy and started taking other bookings, and besides just this one club. Then I started producing my own shows, started doing a monthly show at that club, and took on a monthly show here in Gadsden called Main Event Comedy.
Well,
And
yeah, is Main Event Comedy? It's a podcast too, right?
we have a podcast. Main Event Comedy has been me and 3 of my friends who are comedians, who 2 of them are also have been involved in wrestling. Delbert Jenkins, who was Whitey Jenkins' cousin, who was actually Steve Pleasing, who had wrestled here in Alabama for 25 years, along with like guys like Will Owens and Cecil Pleasing and people like that. And then it also involves Shane Knowles, who is the promoter of Peach State Wrestling over here in Georgia. That, my God, you've had some of the biggest names in wrestling have passed through there and got their start there in Peach State. And then another buddy of ours, Wes Sears, who's just a young dude here in Gadsden, who's a comedian, but also a big wrestling fan too. And so, yeah, we did a podcast out of it for a little while that kind of hovered between comedy and wrestling and stuff like that. But yeah, Main Event Comedy, it was mostly a comedy group / comedy shows we were producing here in Alabama.
Well, let me ask you this: did you not have a persona before Whitey Jenkins? Like a year or two ago, I remember you having a name, but then I don't know whether it was right during cancel culture time or whatever. But
Uh,
I can't remember what it was, dude. But
well,
I thought it was cool, man.
I,
So
I've had a couple. So in wrestling, um, back when that $5 wrestling was a popular thing that High Spots was doing with Freight Train and Jeff Hart and all these guys. I wanted to go do that, but I really didn't want to, use Gene Jackson for whatever little bit of legitimacy he had left, if any.
Right.
So I was actually going to do some wrestling on these shows. It's like, well, the wrestling's so bad, it don't matter that my wrestling's going to be terrible. So I created what I wanted. I wanted it to be the ultimate old school Memphis wrestler. It was going to be a masked guy. So I got tights made. Had the classic 3 stars down the leg, like every wrestler in the world that wore. And then I had a knockoff masked superstar mask and singlet and all this, and tassels on my boots and all this. And I was like, I got to come up with a name. I got to come up with a name. And I'm like, well, Bill Dundee was a superstar. This guy's gonna be a megastar. So that was gonna be the nickname, Megastar. And I was like, well, we've had Dundees and we've had Fargos and we've had everybody. I'm like, we really have only had the one Monroe, Sputnik Monroe, and then maybe his son Bubba for a little bit. Like, last name's gonna be Monroe. And so that was really, really struggling to come up with a first name. And finally I was like, well, this is a Memphis. All this is Memphis stuff. Memphis Monroe, Megastar Memphis Monroe. I'm like, that's perfect. So I tell the guys that I'm going to be doing this on the show. It's going to be Megastar Memphis Monroe, because they were getting ready to get me booked on the $5 wrestling up there. And I made a Facebook page and all the stuff you do now when you have a new gimmick.
Right.
And I put all this in place. I've got the gear made. As soon as the damn site goes live, within, I don't know, 15 minutes, Jeremiah Plunkett sends me a message and says, Memphis Monroe is a porn star, right?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Turns out there is a large-breasted blonde porn star named Memphis Monroe. And I was like, we're here. So we're just doing this. And I had already made an email, memphismonroe@mail.com, MAIL, by the way.
Right.
To do for bookings and stuff like that. Well, needless to say, there's some horrible shit got emailed to that email. I got to where I wouldn't even open the emails. I see they had attachments. I'm like, nah,
Right.
not getting me again, pal. But yeah, so we had Megastar Memphis Monroe that went up to Charlotte and wrestled Freight Train on a $5 wrestling DVD with Neil Taylor in my corner as my manager. I forget what name we gave him. We gave him he was a Mantel. A play on Dutch's WWF gimmick, and that's a long story on why we went with that. But it was a rib on Freight Train. But it was a good time. And then there was Whitey Jenkins, and then I started getting some trouble with some bookers about the name Whitey. They didn't want to put the name Whitey on flyers, so I changed the name to Buck Jenkins for a little while. But I just wasn't feeling that, and it pissed me off that people asked me to change the name. So I changed it back to Whitey Jenkins. And went back to doing it the gimmick the way I'd done it before. And then here recently, I don't know. I go through these stages where I'm all in on something, then I'm all out. And I was like, we're not doing Whitey Jenkins at all. But of course, from Whitey Jenkins stemmed, all kinds of silliness. The OWF wrestling promotion where we were taking footage.
I love it. Me personally, I loved it.
OWF started out as a rib on my friends, because OWF just started out with me taking a bunch of VHS tapes of guys I used to wrestle with. Tony Dabbs and Neil and the Flyboys and all these different folks from like Mississippi in the late 90s. And I took that footage and I chopped it all up along with some of the worst stuff from Corinth that I could find. And then I gave everybody new names. I made up names for them and would then present it like Whitey Jenkins is presenting the show of his promotion. And I didn't tell him that I was doing it. I just put it out there one week. And I had like Blaylock had a different gimmick on there, and he was like all Jackpot Jesse or some shit. And
I loved it, dude.
and that was fun. But we burned through that footage pretty quick. And then another buddy of mine got involved, and he took over finding footage online and making up the names, and it kind of become a whole other thing. And it's still going now. You can check it out on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Retro Wrestling Network. There's over 1,000 videos on there. Some of it's that OWF stuff. Everything else is old school wrestling, and it's every kind of old school wrestling you can think of. But needless to say, a ton of Memphis, a ton of USWA. Every bit of USWA TV that I could find is on that channel, and that's what we use to do the podcast every week.
Right.
But anyway, to circle back around to finish answering your question without throwing all this other wrestling shit in the middle. Yeah, mostly now my only involvement in wrestling is podcast, and I go and I do comedy across, across the South, and it's picking up for me. So I'm happy about that.
Well, look, here's something I'm dying to know. First wrestling match, first time going on stage to do stand up. Which one was more nerve wracking?
The wrestling match.
Really?
Yeah. And I'll say this, I went through a spell where I kind of regretted my time in wrestling. I was like, man, I never really made it anywhere. I didn't really do anything real significant. And I hurt every day when I get up out of bed, when I can't get up out of bed, and it's kind of for nothing. But when I started doing comedy, I was ahead of the curve because everybody that was new like me, that was starting out on these open mics, were scared to death to go on stage. They were nervous wreck.
Right.
And it didn't faze me to get up in front of people because I had been in front of big crowds, small crowds. I was always the heel for the most part. So I was used to, once you've been in front of 2,000 people throwing shit at you and calling you every name in the book, what's the worst thing gonna do if you tell a joke? Not laugh? That's not that bad. So from day
ain't
one,
the first time I've been booed out of an arena. So
exactly. So from day one, I was probably more confident as a comedian than I had any right to be, but it was just because I was comfortable in front of people. So all I really had to focus on doing was coming up with good material. That most everybody spends their first year overcoming stage fright and
yes.
getting their voice and getting used to talking in front of people and not being thrown off because these people over here are talking and not paying attention, or this person's trying to heckle you and shit like that. Didn't have to worry about any of that at all. So after that, I was like, you know what? This is all the wrestling. It all served a purpose. I'm happy with it now that I spent that time because it's made being a comedian that much easier.
Dude, I'm with you 100%, man. Anything you got to do in front of people, the more comfortable you are being in front of people, the easier it makes it. It don't matter what it is, whether it's pro wrestling, comedy, being up on stage if you're a singer or a musician. Being comfortable in front of people is the biggest hurdle. Was for me in wrestling, because when I first started, man, I had a lot of stage fright in wrestling, and it's rough because, you're worried about dumb shit. You ain't even really worried about once the bell rings, happens there. You're worried about falling on the way to the ring or just anything stupid. But man, I can see where being a wrestler, I can see that where it helped you immensely once you got to go on stage, because you're not going to get thrown off by any reactions either. No. You done had people, like you said, throw shit at you, call you every name in the book. There ain't too much that's going to throw you off on stage, How long did it take you to kind of work out your act, man? Where you got something, did it work for you immediately, or how long did it take you to kind of get some jokes and get a set that actually really worked for you?
It took a while because I was only going up sporadically those first few years, and you can't really build a set like that. You can't really figure out what works and what doesn't. It wasn't until here about 3 or 4 years ago when I started going up every weekend and going on a regular basis and trying.
Same thing with wrestling.
Absolutely, man. I've told so many people this. It's amazing the similarities between breaking into wrestling and breaking into comedy. You start out, you don't make any money. Friends are how you get booked on shows, word of mouth, and you
got to get them reps in too. You got to work. The more you work, the better you get at it. So
it's wrestling without bumps, but everything else is exactly the same, and it's that repetition, and that's when I finally started to get. If anybody considers me good, that's when I started to get good. When I was getting to go do it, all the time, and I kind of molded an act. And like I said, I had a Whitey act, I had a Gene act, and I had about 15 minutes for each. And now that I've kind of pushed Whitey out of the picture, I've kind of reworked that to where now I have about a half hour collectively that I can do as Gene, um, as needed. But just like with wrestling, anything else in comedy, that stage time is hard to get as far as like minutes. Like
Right.
you're every time you get your foot in the door somewhere new, you build yourself up over here at this Aniston club, and okay, I can go do 30 minutes there. But when I get booked somewhere new and they're figuring out who I am and what I can do, now we're back to doing 5 to 10.
Right.
And we got to work our way up to show them that, we've got material and that we're good. And I like that, honestly, and you eventually reach a level where, you start doing a lot of time everywhere, but I'm not there. I don't know with the job I have and the time I have to dedicate to it and the age I am, if I'm going to get anywhere like that. And, if I do, great. And if I don't, I do it because I enjoy it. And like I say, I have a very realistic viewpoint of all this shit. I
Right.
always get kind of amused at some of these guys that wrestle 10 miles from their house their entire life, and they go talking about their career as a wrestler, and it's like, you didn't have a career, man. You wrestled in a barn 20 miles from your house for a belt that your dad bought, settle down.
And here's the thing. I know the definition's not quite right, but in my opinion, for it to be a career, you had to make a living at it. You had to pay all your bills, support your family, buy your food. For it to be a career, you had to have made a living doing this. And I'm the same way, dude. I mean, I had a couple of little decent runs, but other than that, I ain't never been signed nowhere. I ain't shit. I ain't never been shit,
I've made more people mad by saying that, like, dude, wrestling's a hobby, and they get mad. This ain't a hobby. This is my passion. They put them stupid memes on it. This is my passion. This is what I'm like, look, man, if you didn't pay your bills with it, it's a freaking hobby, and you don't retire from your hobby.
Right.
When my dad gets tired of fishing, he's going to just stop fishing. He's not going to retire from fishing. He just ain't going to fish no more. And that's what's going to happen when most of these folks decide to stop wrestling. They're gonna quit wrestling. They're not gonna retire, even though they'll make a grant. These are guys, like I say, that's never been anywhere. They go and take their goddamn boots off in the ring.
I'm gonna retire my boots on such and such night.
Yes, like, and they tease it for weeks. And I don't want to come on here and be that guy. Like,
no, but I mean, it's the truth. I mean, I'm like you. I'm a realist. It is what it is. You can't sugarcoat the truth and the facts. I mean, they are what they are. If you ain't made a living at it, it wasn't a career. It was, like you said,
there's nothing wrong with it.
No, it's a fucking hobby.
You did what you did, and it was fun. But quit trying to make it more than what it was, because you sound like a dumbass. But like, for me, like, the reason I do this podcast now is, for some reason, I don't know, 3 years ago or so, I realized that I just don't enjoy modern wrestling. I'm not going to be the guy that goes on the internet and fights everybody and argues with everybody and says that it sucks and all that. That's for Jim Cornette to do, I guess. I don't know, for somebody. And I love that guy, but
he's one of the only ones making a career out of this.
Yeah,
shit.
He's making a living doing it. He's making he's making more money than a lot of the people he's making mad. But I just realized that I don't enjoy it, so one day I just stopped watching it. Like, and I got sucked in before WrestleMania, and I watched clips of the stuff that Cody and The Rock and those guys were doing. And it kind of, from Royal Rumble to WrestleMania, I was a little interested in a couple of different storylines. And then I watched WrestleMania, and I was over it. And I haven't watched a single minute of it since. And I don't watch any of the local stuff. And it's not a knock on anybody. I don't say that to shit on anybody or diminish it. It's just I'm just not a fan anymore. It's just not. It's not for me. And to me, it makes more sense. Like, if you're not enjoying something, then just don't partake in it. The people who still watch the stuff every week, clearly just to shit on it, just so they can go online and trash it, I'm just completely bumfuzzled. Like, if you don't like it, don't watch it. But don't say it sucks, because clearly there's people who are watching it and they're enjoying it. So let them enjoy it. Uh, but I find it funny that I see, a lot of the same people doing a lot of the same stuff that they've done for years now that they've always done uh, when it comes to a lot of the local wrestling. And, people talk about how bad it is in Memphis. It's like that, like Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, like all these different southern states for as long as I've been around it. It's been this way to where if guys ever, and I've said this for years too, if guys ever figure out how to manufacture the drama in the ring that they manufacture outside of the ring and on the internet, holy shit, everybody will be rich, man.
Here's
But
the
they
thing, dude.
can't. All this dumb drama that goes on Facebook and all these places, and it doesn't sell a single freaking ticket. It just makes everybody look like goose.
I believe you could sell out an arena and just put the drama on Facebook and social media on a big screen and show these different guys fighting back and forth and arguing. I believe you'd sell more tickets than you do to most of the wrestling shows.
I would like to hope so anyway, because most of the energy put online towards wrestling doesn't promote wrestling. It doesn't sell a ticket. It doesn't make it look good.
Right.
It just makes people roll their eyes and go, is that what them folks do? Jeez, and they just move on.
Well, let me ask you this. You made a remark about comedy, the similarities between comedy and wrestling and podcasting, dude. My thing I say is booking especially a wrestling podcast. Look, it's booking a wrestling show with no fucking matches. You have to deal with all the same bullshit that you do if you was running a show in a town somewhere. Wrestlers no show. Wrestlers double book themselves. It's the same shit with no wrestling matches. What's your thoughts about wrestling podcast and the similarities between? I mean, because sometimes I think, well, fuck, I might as well just start my own wrestling show.
It's why I moved away from doing interviews, and if I wasn't doing the format of wrestling podcasts that I'm able to do now with the USWA podcast and the Memphis one I do with Ray Russell and WrestleCopia, I wouldn't want to do it because, oh yeah, man. I mean, I dipped my toe in the water of trying to do like interviews as recently as a few months ago. And people was just all about wanting to be on the show. And then day of, if you're lucky, they cancel the day of. Most of the time you're sitting here on StreamYard, like an idiot, and then they don't show up. And then the next day you get a message, hey man, sorry I had to work late, or old lady,
like, man,
whatever.
Motherfucker, you could have sent me this message yesterday and told me, man.
And then shit like, some guy messaged you like, we got heat. No, well, you had Buster on the podcast to me. Me and Buster's got heat because he works the so-and-so show.
God.
And I work the other show, and we're enemies now. And if you have him on your show, that means you're supporting that show and not I'm like, I'm not into all that bullshit. I just had a conversation with somebody.
Dumbest shit in history, man. Look, I've got a whole company that's somewhat blackballed their talent or discouraged them from coming on my show. All over some shit that I really had nothing to do with, to be honest with you. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy, man. And me personally, like you said, wrestling kind of, you felt like it kind of developed you for comedy and podcasting. It kind of helps you get ready for that. I kind of feel that way now, man. Like I said, I ain't never really been shit in wrestling. Had a decent run with KAW. Did the mullets with Memphis Championship Wrestling for a little while. Other than that, never been signed nowhere, never been shit. None of that shit. But I feel like the wrestling experience has helped me tremendously now that I'm kind of doing this.
Yeah.
I feel like it's, here's the thing about wrestlers. When you bring them on, if you can relate to them and they can relate to you, this shit's so much easier. These podcasts run so much smoother because I watch people who aren't wrestlers or never had actually in the ring and lived the life of a wrestler. All the bullshit and the travel and all this bullshit. And sometimes you watch these podcasts and they're awkward. You can tell there's a little bit of a disconnect between the host and the guest. And I feel like the wrestling experience that I got over the years I feel like it translates now, helps me when I get guys on, because I get guys on all the time now that tell me, man, I'm a little nervous or I'm a lot nervous. And I'm nervous all the time before we do it too. But I feel like once I get them on and we get to talking, they start relaxing. And that's a big deal to for everything to feel organic and be organic to me, you know. You've been doing this a lot longer than I have. When did you say you did your first podcast, 2006 or 7?
2007, yeah.
Yes, man.
Doing an interview is just to me is a lot like working a match. There's a give and a take. There's a certain amount of comfort that's got to be felt between the host and the guest, and they each got to kind of be able to work off each other and get the other one's cues, you know, that they're sending, be it verbally or, you know, just just through their body language and stuff. And not everybody's cut out for interviewing. Like kind of what you were talking about there is you got so many of these where it's just some kid who's a big wrestling fan, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but they go and they start a podcast and then they, you know, bring these wrestlers on and they're just like, oh, hey, what a you remember that time when, you know, didn't you have a match with didn't you wrestle for no, I didn't wrestle for them. Oh,
it's like they didn't even think about none of this before they brought these fucking people on, man. Dude, I see that all the time, and I'm like, and I don't really rehearse anything. The only thing I might rehearse is how I'm going to intro somebody in the show. I might run it through my mind a few times to kind of work it out. But as far as the show, like me and you chatted beforehand, what I tell you, I said, well, once we get on, we kind of just go where the conversation takes us.
And that's what I like. But that's the equivalent of calling it in the ring. And there's people who aren't there's people who are just as uncomfortable about doing that in an interview as they are in doing that in a match. You know, they want to know, what are you going to ask me? What's this about? Don't hit me with any surprise questions, because I got to know what I'm going to say, because I don't want to say anything that's going to make me look stupid or get me heat. Because again, and that's the thing, man, about, you know, if I was a wrestler now and being on these podcasts, you know, who knows what you could say on one of these damn things that's going to get you heat with a promoter or another wrestler, or what, or, you know, banned off a show because you mentioned a different podcast on a podcast and we don't like that podcast and you acknowledge they existed. So, I mean, you know, I've heard even now, like there's guys that I was told that were trying to get on like a convention show, and they're like, no, you can't do it if you're going to mention a certain show that you work with. Like, you can't mention those people.
That's crazy, man. I just do not understand it. And that's the one thing I try to do here, man. The one thing I want to do, and my goal is there should be one place where any of the guys or girls in the wrestling business can come on no matter where they work at and all be treated equally, all get the same treatment, all get to express their views and opinions. And dude, I get so fed up with a lot of the politics, man, in wrestling. It's just ridiculous, man. Like I said, I got a whole company that pretty much discouraged their talent from coming on, if not outright ban them, over some shit I really wasn't even involved in. I just had a podcast with a dude that they didn't want to come on, and I did the podcast, and you know,
and I know exactly. Me and you have not talked about this at all, but I know exactly. I can imagine exactly which company you're talking about, and I can imagine who you interviewed that upset them. Because I interviewed the same person, and that same company got upset with me, and I didn't give a shit because I didn't work for them and didn't care to work for them and wasn't trying to work for them. And in fact, I had some of their people back when, this is when me and Charles Anders and Scott Morgan were doing those Cheap Heat TVs every Sunday night. And I had some of their people on the show, and that promoter got upset, severely upset, because I wasn't aware of who their tag team champions were at the time. I introduced one of the guys, like, I think they're the tag champs, I'm not sure. I got a freaking phone call as soon as we got through recording. So-and-so is upset because you didn't know who the tag champions were. I said, I don't watch that fucking show. I don't know who the tag champions are. I'm like, I don't watch any wrestling these days. I don't know who their champions are. I was just having them on to be nice. I don't give a shit about any of this petty crap that that y'all are all arguing about, because there's no real money at stake, folks. I
Right.
understood when Vince and Eric Bischoff and Vince and, these different people over the years, that was real money. That was like important stuff. None of these people are making real money. This is
Right.
all just pissing contest and pettiness. There's no real stakes in any of this shit. So calm down.
Yeah, man. And here's the thing: I've had a few guys on that actually work for them, and I've never said one derogatory thing about their company or any of their talent. I mean, if you've watched any of my shows, you know my stick. I bring people on to make them look as good as possible. I'm not bringing nobody on to shit on them, because how long do you think that podcast will last? It might get a shitload of views for 3 shows, and then nobody will come on. Nobody's going to want to come on if they know you're going to rip them apart. And I just get sick of it, man. And I got to the point where I don't even like guest no showing and shit. I don't even let it phase me. Hey, my spiel is I can book these motherfuckers, but I can't make them show up. And that's how I look at it. If a motherfucker don't show or calls and cancels at the last minute or sends me a message, I just put a message out telling the people no podcast tonight. I don't even sweat it no more. But at first, it used to piss me off.
Yeah.
But I ain't got time for it. There's tomorrow. Yeah. There's the day after tomorrow. There's 100 other guys that would have liked to have that spot you had tonight if you would have told me ahead of time. You know what I mean?
Yep. And it ain't paying your bills, so you know what? You're doing this to provide. I mean, and I was the same way when I was doing those interview shows. Like, I'm just trying to provide a forum for these folks for fans to learn more about them, for them to market themselves, and to be able to provide them a platform to sell themselves in a way that they don't necessarily have means to on a wrestling show. You can only cut promos in character related to that show, but you can come on a show like this and they can present themselves however they want to be. They can be totally in character, or they can tell who they really are, anything they want to do. And how many places do a lot of these folks get the opportunity to do that? So, I mean, I think you provide a great service for these people. And if some of these promoters would just view it like that, as, hey, this is a show that's out there that allows other people to promote themselves in their shows, but it can also allow them to promote us in our show, and nobody's getting hurt.
And it's free publicity.
Yeah.
I mean, it ain't like, look, even the company I'm talking about, if they opened up their guests right now, I wouldn't bring not one of their wrestlers on and try to make them look bad, or anybody. I wouldn't bring the guy who runs it on. And I've actually sent him a message and tried to get him to come on, but he never responded, never even looked at the message.
Yeah.
But I just ain't got time for all that, man. If you want to come on and let's talk about your show you got coming up, or let's promote your talent, let's promote your company, that's what I'm about. I don't give a fuck about you don't like you, or you don't like him, or first of all, you're not going to tell me who the fuck I can bring on and who I'm not anyway. And if you try to pressure me, I don't respond well to that kind of pressure. All you're going to do is let me change my words wisely. You don't want me to focus in on you personally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is the way I feel about it. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and if you don't like it, fuck it. And if you want to hold your guest away from your wrestlers, your talent away from me, it's only hurting them in the end. It's just free exposure for them, free publicity for them and your company. I don't care if I don't like you personally. If I bring your guy on, I'm going to put him and your company over while they're on. It's just as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, there were times, when we had to do that Cheap Heat show, that, we would bring people on, and afterwards, Charles and them be like, I know that guy we had on tonight, you don't particularly care for them, but, you were very nice to him, and there was a chance that you could have called them out on this one thing, and you didn't do it. And I was like, man, if somebody comes on as a guest on a show that I'm hosting, if they have enough respect for me to do my show, then I have enough respect for them that I'm not here to have a gotcha moment or call them out or be disrespectful to them. Regardless of how I feel about them personally, professionally, anything else. I said, because to me, and again, this is back comparing the podcasting to being in the ring. To me, that's equivalent of getting in a ring with somebody and them giving them your body, and you injure them because you don't like them or they made you mad or
Right.
whatever. Like I would never have done that to somebody in the ring, and I'm not going to have on a podcast somebody blindside somebody with some shit that they weren't expecting. You know, if I say, hey Buster, I'm bringing you on tonight, and I want to talk about this, and this may get a little heated, but let's talk about it, and you're like, okay, cool. Well, now it's
Right.
all fair game. We know where we're at. But if I'm just like, hey, Buster, let's just come on and chat tonight, and then we get to conversation about halfway through the interview, I'm like, I didn't tell you I was going to talk about this, but let's talk about that time, and I hit you with it.
Right.
That's shitty, you know? And so, we quit doing, a lot of the reason we quit doing that podcast is because they kept wanting to do interviews. And man, we were just talking about, what it takes to do, interviews. It's hard enough to do one-on-one interviews. It's damn near impossible to have 3 people trying to interview one person.
Dude, I figured
we
that
never
out.
could figure it out. It never got good. I hated it every stinking week from the first time we did it to the last time we did it. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, when I first started, I had guest co-host.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to have a permanent co-host, but then I realized the more people you got on, man, everybody's stepping all over each other.
Yep.
It's hard to get a clean interview or anything when everybody's talking on each other. And if you got, I just finally decided, man. I told my wife one night, I said, I don't think I'm going to have a co-host. I had to do a few by myself, and I realized they seemed to work better. Worked a hell of a lot smoother. It was easier, a lot more simple. And then here's the thing: if you got guest co-hosts, you still have to worry about them not showing up too. So if I've done billed a guest co-host for a week for a show, and then all of a sudden the last minute they can't be there, or they no show, or even if they tell me, I'm not going to be able to make it, it still kind of throws the whole show off because everybody expected this one thing, and it just is what it is. And here's something else I'm not going to do either. I'm not going to dog your company or you, but I'm also not going to censor what my guests say. That ain't what I do. Yeah. If these people have something to say and y'all have heat, I mean, I'm not going to tell these guys, hey, you can't come on here if you're going to mention so-and-so, because, I'm not going to do that to them. It ain't my job to censor their thoughts, their opinions, and their feelings. Long as they don't come on and say nothing that's going to kick me off, get me kicked off of Facebook or YouTube, and that's the wrestling business. Here's the thing. If there's politics in the dressing room and people do interviews, well, this shit comes out. If you fuck somebody over, it's gonna come out in the end eventually. It just always does. And I'm not gonna censor my guest. Me and another guy had a conversation just 2 days ago, and I said, I told him, it was talking about some different guests and stuff, and I told him, I said, look, I'm cool with them. I said, I can work with anybody. I said, but I'm not going to censor what another guest, because that's what they were worried about, what another guest was going to say. I said, the one thing I can't control is what this motherfucker says. I don't know what he's going to say anyway. We don't talk about none of this bullshit. We get on and just talk, it's like you said, call it in the ring. And I don't know what you're going to say right now. I don't know what the fuck you're going to say next.
I could haul off and say anything. And that's the thing I understand is, like, if somebody says something on your show, it doesn't mean you endorse it. If I tore into some kind of terrible hate speech right now, it doesn't mean like, okay, well, Buster agrees with that. Buster feels the same way Gene does. Like, no, Buster had Gene on his program, and Gene went into business for himself and said some messed up shit. That don't mean you endorsed it just because it happened on your show. I guess maybe if after I said it, you're like, yeah, damn right, then okay, you did endorse it. But I got questioned when I had a guy on my show. I got questioned afterwards, like, why didn't you defend our show? Because that's not my place. I don't work for your show. Why would I defend it? I didn't agree with it because I don't have an opinion on it. I said, but I'm not there to defend it. I'm there to ask questions. They answer it. And I said, I go, but if you didn't like what was said, you can come on next week and then you can tell your side of the story. And I won't defend him either. But they didn't want to do that. They just wanted to criticize the fact that I didn't defend them, even though I really didn't. I didn't have a leg to stand on to defend it because I didn't know if it was true or not.
Right. That's the thing. Unless I know, I don't know. So anybody can come on here and say damn near anything. And like you said, if they come on and say something that you don't like, I'm all for. All you got to do, you got the same equal opportunity. Hit me up, and you can be on the next day or two. If it's something that heated, you know, and you want to say your piece, you're welcome to it. But I can't control what people say, and I'm not going to censor what people say. If I got to start doing that, then I'm done with this shit. You know what I mean? That's like cussing. If I got to quit cussing to do this shit, this fucking show's over right now, dude. So look, man, you've been doing podcasts since 2006. Talk to me about, other than nobody was doing them then, talk to me about the difference in podcasting then to podcasting now, man.
So there were very few options on how to even actually go about doing it. So at the time, the best way that I found to do it, there was something called Blog Talk Radio, and it was a pay service where they had a free version and they had, you know, tiers of it like they do now. And I think I was on like the $20 version or something like that. And so on that, I had to get on my cell phone and call in, and then I had to log into a website, and you had a board there. And then I had to send the other person a telephone number, and they had to call in, and then I had to bring them on the air. And you go back and listen to that now, because there's some of I don't have a lot of those interviews, but like I got some of the ones I did with like Randy Hales and Derek King and Mike DiBiase and Eugene Dinsmore and different people, and they sound like this literal hell now.
Right.
Like they just sound like absolute shit. But it was you know, top notch stuff at the time.
Right.
And there was a few different services like that you could use, but there really wasn't a whole lot of options back then. You had to kind of explain to people what it even was. Like, hey, you want to come on my podcast? And most of the time they're like, what's a podcast? And oh, well, it's like an interview that we do over the thing. I remember one of the only ones I got turned down on. I sent a message to Percy Pringle, who was on Facebook. I knew his son, and I said, hey, I'd like to have you, you know, do a podcast. And he's like, no, son, I don't really believe in breaking kayfabe and, you know, talking about the business just out in public like that. And I mean, this was like 2008 by the time, you know.
Really, that's like, very little kayfabe existed at that point already.
And I'm like, well, you know, I've seen some of these shoot interviews you've done, but they're getting paid, so I get it. So I didn't push the issue, but that's one of the only times I ever just straight up got just flat turned down.
I've had a guest that or not a guest, the guy I've talked to, and we talked about doing a podcast, and but you could tell once we passed a couple of messages back and forth, you could tell he was kind of fishing to be paid. And look, here's the thing: if I was making money off of this, where I had the ability to pay guests to come on, there might be some guys I would pay, and this guy would probably be one, depending on the rate that I would actually have paid to come on. But it's just not the facts. I don't make no money off this bullshit. And I'm not going to spend I mean, that's just the way it is. This motherfucker's either going to grow on its own, you know, until I start seeing some returns on it. I'm not going out and spending hundreds of dollars on guests that.
Because how do you recoup it?
You're not going to.
You're not getting any of that back.
I've had certain guys on that I thought for sure, man, this fucking one here is going to get a ton of views. Got less than other motherfuckers that you wouldn't have think got any views. These motherfuckers get way more, and it's a crapshoot. And you know, that's kind of where the conversation ended with the guy. But I understand his point too.
Yeah.
I mean that's what you're in the wrestling business for. Period, is to make money. You should be. Most guys who have actually ever made a living at this, they definitely want to make money at anything they do in wrestling, and I fully understand that. But I mean, you know, it's rough, man. And I imagine now, like you said, that sounds cavemanish, all that shit. It sounds like a lot of work to get a podcast on. Where now, I mean, basically you set it. Now I finally got me a little setup, so my shit's always ready. I sit down, flip the computer on, flip the lights on, and I'm pretty much ready, man. How
Yeah.
much easier is it for you, man? Because you do more than just the retro wrestling. Like, I mean, through the years, you've had so many different kind of versions that I don't even
Yeah.
know if I've seen all the different things you've done, dude.
Oh,
Talk to me.
I'm sure you haven't.
Well, talk to
Sure, a
me
lot of
about
people have.
through the years to now some of the different podcasts, different ideas that y'all tried or whatever, dude.
I mean, there's been different incarnations. Like I say, what originally it started out with Cheap Heat Radio, was just me doing interviews. Um, Eventually, and they would start and stop. I would do one for a while, and then for whatever reason, I would have to stop. And then one of my favorite incarnations of a podcast, me and Neil Taylor started doing a weekly podcast where um, he was my co-host, and we would do most of the podcast where we would talk about things that went on in wrestling that week, be it nationwide wrestling or local stuff,
Right.
and then not every show we wouldn't have a guest, but some shows we would have a guest, and we managed to bounce those interviews back and forth pretty good. Those went fairly smooth. And I enjoyed those. We did them every Sunday night. We had to do those through Blog Talk Radio still, and that was fun. And then, gosh, there's been a ton of different names of them, but most of them usually were always rooted in just me interviewing people in some form or fashion. Until you get up to the Cheap Heat TV, where it was me and Charles Anders, and for a while Shane Mako, and at times Scott Morgan. Every Sunday night, we did them live every Sunday night for a couple of years straight there,
Wow.
and we would have guests on there. For a while, we was having a lot of guys from like Georgia and over here in Alabama, and we talked about, we'd spend like half the show interviewing somebody, then the second half we would talk about either like modern wrestling or shows we were working, because I was managing them on shows. They were the Violent Gentlemen on
Okay.
shows in Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee and whatnot. And then towards the end of that, I had got to where I kind of wasn't watching any current wrestling, and neither was Charles. And it's like, well, how are we going to talk about current wrestling? We don't watch it. And then, that started making it harder to interview people too, because it's like, what the fuck are we going to talk to these guys about? We don't keep up with what they're
Right.
doing. We're not even keep up with like what happened on Raw Monday night. So what are we talking to these guys about? So that's kind of why that one went away. And then me and my buddy Bob Anderson, who does the OWF stuff with me and him just kind of as just a goof, made a podcast. And it's kind of like what we're doing now with the USWA, except every week we were watching an episode of Herb Abrams' UWF, that god awful UWF show from 1990. And we would watch and review those episodes. But it was
That
around
sounds
the
like that was
time.
fun, man.
It was, and they still exist on my Main Event Comedy YouTube channel. You can check those out. They were fun. We had a good time with those, but eventually Bob tapped out. He's like, this shit's awful, Gene. I can't keep watching this every week. I think we made it through 12 episodes, and we finally had to stop. And but I knew that was a format that I enjoyed. Like, I liked that. That was fun. Like Bob's right. The show was god awful, and why do you want to subject yourself to that every week? But it just kind of went away. And then I discovered WrestleCopia, and started listening to his podcast. Ray's got a whole series of different wrestling related podcasts on there, but most of them are geared towards old school wrestling. Some of them review old WWF, some of them old UWF. One of them reviews old Georgia.
Right.
And then he let it be known on Facebook. He's like, I'm fixing to add a new one where I'm going to review Memphis 1985. And Jamie Ward and a couple other people tagged me in it. And I messaged Ray. I said, it's funny that they tagged me. I said, because when I saw that post, I almost reached out and asked, do you need a co-host? And he's like, yeah, actually I do. And I said, well, I'm your guy. And I sent him a couple of those UWF episodes to watch. And he's like, yeah, man, yeah, you'd be a good choice. So me and him started doing those 1985 ones. And like I said back at the beginning, after we had did several of those episodes, I had been on P3 Radio with Richard and Josh a few different times as both myself. They were fans of having Whitey Jenkins come on pretty regularly, and have shenanigans with him. And I'd always told myself, like, I'd like to do something with those guys regularly. They're funny. We just kind of, we get each other. We're on the same
Right.
wavelength. As a matter of fact, producing comedy shows, I brought Richard in. He had told me one time, just off air, just kind of, he's like, well, I'd sure love to try stand-up comedy. I'm like, I produce comedy shows. Anytime you want to try it, I'll put you on stage. And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So his first ever comedy show, we brought him to Gadsden, and he got on stage and did great. He's a freaking natural. And so he's done a couple of shows for me now. And now he's got a regular hosting gig at the comedy club up in Jackson, Tennessee, up close to where he lives. And he's starting to do this stuff on a regular basis now. He's a super funny guy. Josh is too. Josh should get on stage. But anyway, whenever I come up with this concept of this USWA podcast, those were the first two guys I reached out to that I wanted to be co-hosts, because I knew that they have product knowledge. They love it. They're not going to be like, well, this week sucked, I don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
But they also have they're also funny, and they're also not afraid to, give their, because that's another thing. Like, and I know we're going to get some criticism from some fans watching the show, who, are going to get mad when we make fun of some stuff. It's like, look, we're not going to act like everything they did in Memphis was gold, because it wasn't.
Right.
There's
man,
a lot
wrestling, dude. There's always
a lot
some
of
bullshit.
bad with the good,
Right.
So the good stuff we're going to praise and have a good time with, and the bad stuff we're going to make fun of and have a good time with, and we're going to, call it all what it is. And they've got the balls to do that, because there's a lot of people who wouldn't, they'd be afraid of the backlash, and I've never been afraid of that. I don't care.
Right.
It is what it is. I mean, like I say, there's some really great stuff, and there's some just the episode we did, we just recorded this past Sunday that'll come out next week, episode 3. It's just an awful show. You could tell that it was one of those shows where they didn't have very many guys there. They were struggling to even put matches on TV. Their card for Monday night, it was one of those cards where you had guys in 2 or 3 different matches, and they all come back in a big 8-man, just because they just didn't have enough people to fill out the card. And you have those sometimes, and it just is what it is. And if we was to sit there and be like, oh, this was the greatest shit ever, it was all great, that kills our credibility. And then people are going to roll their eyes and like, these guys are just here to jack off to us every week. They don't have no reality of what this actually is. So, some of it's good, some of it's bad, and that's wrestling, and that's definitely Memphis wrestling. I started realizing that us doing the 85 show. Told Ray after a few episodes, I was like, boy, I remembered 85 to be a lot better than this. Like, some of this shit is hard to get through. And he's like, yeah, early 85, he said, is pretty tough. And we're just now in getting into March, starting to level off and get to some better stuff. And when we started 93, after a couple episodes, I told Ray, I was like, 93 starts off just as rough as 85. I was like, I'm starting to wonder if maybe Memphis wrestling ain't as good as I thought it was.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, dude. It's there's some stinkers everywhere in wrestling, man.
Yeah.
It ain't any place that ran, especially TV, weekly TV. There's you got to take the good with the bad, like you said, man. They all can't be fucking Oscar award-winning fucking shows, It just,
that's right.
It is what it is.
Sometimes you have Kane, sometimes you have the Christmas creature. It's just,
or you have fake Diesel.
Fake Diesel. So I've been trying to really get our Facebook page going, and if you see right below my name, folks, facebook.com/retro wrestling review. Go check that page out. Please give us a like and a follow. We've been putting a lot of great old Memphis content on there of different types. And I shared a post the other day, and it was a picture of Christmas Creature and a picture of Fake Diesel and one of his other characters. I don't remember which one.
Dr. Isaac Yankum.
Yeah, I put the caption as like, sorry, Glenn, they can't all be winners,
Hey, they all led to Kane, though.
Hey,
every one of those led to Kane, and Kane was a winner, man. It just was.
And he's a freaking mayor of Knoxville now, which is just, blows me away. And, at some point as we work our way through that, and it's going to take a long time, but, we plan through going week to week of 93. up through 94, 95. And it's funny, I was going over this with Ray on one of his shows, and he's like, tell us a little bit about your plans. I'm like, yeah, man, we're going to rock through 93, 94, 95, 96. And then, we may go back and do 91 and 92. He's like, you forgot 97. I was like, 97's tough in some places, man. Like I said, we not cover every week of 97, but you were around for some of that. So you're somebody when we get up to that, I'm going to want to have on as a guest and be like, hey man, tell us about it. What was going on back there? Was it as much of a madhouse backstage as it appeared to be out front? Because it seemed like there was a lot going on.
I was new there, and a lot of changes, man. I will say this about 97. Before it shut down, when the investment company or whatever it was bought part of it, and they came in and dressed up the colors, put the streamers up where the guys come out, where you come out at and stuff. I thought it was a nice improvement for USWA, but just, man, it shut down that quick. I mean it just did, man. September 14th, I want to say, and I could be wrong about that. My buddy, my best friend in life, had a car wreck. He had an aneurysm that caused him to have a car wreck, and he died the same day the very last USWA TV show aired.
Oh my God.
So I want to say it's September 14th, 1997, maybe. Yeah. And I mean, we were booked, and then all of a sudden Bruno calls me and says, hey, no TV. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, well, we don't know right now. We don't know what's going on. And then I went on and started doing something else somewhere else, and then it was just gone, It was
well, one of his podcasts, Lawler tells the story of how quickly that all fell apart there at the very end, and it's pretty interesting to hear. And yeah, man, like aesthetically, it looked like things were going in a good direction, but I mean, like from a booking perspective, the thing that stands out to me about like 97, I think it is 97, or maybe it's going out of 96 and 97. When you get to the USWA version of the Nation of Domination, and you got Tracy Smothers as Shaquille Ali,
right,
and Randy X and Queen Shaniqua, or whatever they were calling before Miss Texas, is like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, this is terrible. Like, this is the like, even as I said, as a kid, I really didn't distinguish between good wrestling, bad wrestling, but by 97, I was just starting to get into the business, and even as a guy who watched all the wrestling he could, would turn on USWA at the time, I was like, what are we doing? Like, holy crap.
Yeah, it was mostly local guys that you'd already knew that cut their teeth around Memphis. Tracy Smothers, Billy Joe, obviously Brian Christopher, PG-13. But other than that, it was mostly WWF guys, the Truth Commission. Yeah. I want to say early in 97, that's when Glenn was the fake Diesel.
Well, he was Doomsday. Was that before Fake Diesel or after?
After Fake Diesel. I'm pretty sure he was Fake Diesel and, oh shit, I can't remember the guy's name now who did Razor.
Rick Titan, that was Rick Fake Razor.
Right, and then he was kind of gone, and that's when Glenn started doing Doomsday again, which Doomsday was basically the same thing he did in Smoky Mountain, Unabomb,
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of
which was like a modern day Humongous, really.
Right.
With a black mask instead of a white mask, but I didn't have a problem with that gimmick. It kind of worked. I really didn't have a problem with any of the guys they had there. Like, they had a lot of good talent. Stephen Dunn was there. They did. It was a lot of good. It was just the shit they were doing with them. Like, was what was the head scratching part of it. It was just like, who's booking this? And I don't know, because I think by that point, Lawler really wasn't doing a lot of the booking. I think he was doing some of it, but I don't know if he was doing it during that Nation of Domination era or not.
I know Dutch was booking at the end. I think when I first went there, I want to say Mike Samples had a hand in booking, but I could be wrong about that. But at the end, Dutch was the one booking the shows. But I mean, just like any other time you're dealing with WWF talent,
Yeah.
you can only do what they allow you to do with WWE. Even Lawler and them could get away with doing a lot more with those guys, putting them in a lot of situations that WWF wouldn't have let other companies put them in. But I mean, you still, if they say no on something, no matter how long you've got it planned or whatever it is, you got to figure out something else to do with them.
Well, I mean, ultimately, whether it was Cornette for OVW, and I know in Power Pro, like it was, yay, we've got all this WWF talent, but then again, it was constantly getting the rug pulled out from under you, and these demands of, well, you can't do this with this guy, and you can't do this with that guy, and you need to, get the belt off him because we're pulling him up, we're calling him up next week, and they had 6 months worth of angles planned for him.
Yeah, it's hard to book good wrestling when, like you said, the rug can be pulled out at any minute, and even it's hard to book good wrestling when you don't. I mean, you don't know what you're going to be able to really do. They're going to allow you to do or not do.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed it. Of course, I mean, that was my first foray into Channel 5, and that was always one of my dreams is to be on Channel 5. Even above working the Coliseum, as a little kid, I wanted to be on Channel 5 TV,
Oh, yeah.
And sure. I will say this, it's a crying shame for the guys because working live TV, I would rather work live TV than anything else. Because I mean, you're either on or you're not. There ain't no going back. There ain't no fixing it. There ain't no redoing no matches. I think it helps guys, especially young guys. I think it puts you on the spot and puts enough pressure on you where you either perform or you don't. Which at the time I wasn't doing nothing but putting guys over anyway. I put everybody over there was to put over. So.
But I mean, you look at guys like The Rock and Kurt Angle who got the opportunity to start there on live TV, and how quick they skyrocketed up the card in WWF compared to the guys who were over there doing the tape shows in Kentucky. Yeah, like you say, it definitely just puts a different sense of urgency on all of it, and you either get it or you don't real quick, and you have no choice to make stuff work when when they know, like, all right, cut, let's try that again.
Right.
There's none of that.
I've done tape shows where I've seen motherfuckers have a match, come back, and something was wrong with the match, and they send them right the fuck back out to have the same fucking match but get it right, and the fans are just sitting there like, what the fuck? It's like, did we just take a hit of acid? Are we tripping here? Is this not the exact same shit we just seen? You know what I mean?
And what's wild is, like, you expect that maybe in like some little small Southern shows, and then you hear stories of like Vince getting pissed at Flair and Savage and making them go back out and redo a TV match, like you said, with no like setup for the crowd or nothing. They just walk out there separately, get in the ring, and then the match just starts back, and they redo it. And then they said he wasn't happy with the second one either, and he just said "fuck it" and just moved on. But they spliced the two together when they aired it. But I was like, holy shit, Flair and Savage got done like that. That's crazy.
It can happen to anybody, dude. Anybody. Dude, man, it's been my pleasure, Gene. This is one I had been looking forward to ever since we talked about it and booked it. Dude, I'm going to tell you right now, I want Whitey Jenkins back.
We may have to have him on to tell his life story before he fades into obscurity.
Well, see, that's the hook, man. Look, I'm based out of wrestling, but I kind of want to be. You mentioned the Tonight Show. That's kind of what I view, my image of what I would like this to become, the Tonight Show of pro wrestling. And I'm always looking for guys that's in the wrestling business but do other things. And I love to bring people on, whether they're musicians, they're singers. I don't care what it is. I love to bring wrestlers on who do other things, man. I'd love to have Whitey Jenkins on, dude, the whole show. Whitey, the whole show, dude.
Well, we can do that because he loves doing that kind of thing, and he's definitely got plenty of stories to tell. He's not shy to public speaking. He can tell you the whole history of his OWF and all that. So we can definitely set that up and make that happen. He would be thrilled to do so. Just got to catch him when he's not in jail. You know how that goes.
I know I know he's got a strip club too. I see some of the
He
food.
does.
Man,
He
I don't know.
stays busy.
Look, I might go look at the bitches, but I don't know if I'm eating at Whitey Jenkins strip club. I'll be honest with
Better
you,
in
man.
theory, ain't it? It really is. Like, I was like, that's the one thing where I don't eat. Like, we're going to mix that into that. We're going to bring that into that as well. Like, come on. But no, Buster, I appreciate you having me on here, man. I've been looking forward to this as well. I enjoy these interviews. I've checked out a bunch of them, and you've talked to a lot of my good
I
friends.
appreciate it, man.
Gary, and then you had Alan on recently, and tons of people. So keep doing what you're doing, man. You do a good job with these interviews and cover a lot of bases. And like I said, you give people, an opportunity to tell stories, and you give fans an opportunity to see another side of these wrestlers that where else are they going to see that? You know what I mean?
Right.
So keep doing it. But thank you for giving me an opportunity to come on here. Thank you for letting me promote the
Matter of
Retro
fact,
Wrestling Review. Folks, check it out. Follow the Facebook page.
Yes, tell them YouTube. Any.
It comes
channels?
out every Wednesday. It drops on WrestleCopia.com. It's WrestleCopia.com. And there's a ton of other great content there. There's all kinds of other great podcasts. If Memphis is your thing, like I say, there's 2 different Memphis podcasts. There's a UWF 1986 review podcast, Georgia 1981 review, the Wrestling Memory Grenade that covers WWF from 1988 right now, but it's always moving around. A lot of great archived content from stuff in the past, and plus a bunch of other podcasters that are part of the network. So make sure you check it out. And I really am proud of this USWA podcast. Like I said, we're going to be having guests on. I've talked to, Jamie and Wolfie and different guys that we're going to be interviewing soon, and a host of other people. Good. And also, I'm going to have a booth at the Legends of Memphis Wrestling Fan Fest that they're going to be having in Jonesboro on Saturday, June the 29th. So if you're there, please come by the table, say hello. Tell me you saw this podcast, or tell me you've checked out the USWA podcast. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. More importantly, because we're wanting to mold it into being what everyone wants it to be, and something everybody can enjoy for years to come. This isn't going to be one of those where it's like, I come on here a year from now, like, yeah, Buster, we did that USWA podcast for about 3 months and then it fizzled out. Like, no, there's stuff in 94 I can't wait to talk about. There's stuff in 95, 96, even some stuff in 97. I like to make fun of it sometimes, because just that Nation of Domination thing just kills me.
Right.
But there's some fun stuff to talk about there as well, and then circle back around and hit 93, 92 eventually. But right now we're focused on 93, and there's some good stuff coming.
Well, here's the thing. Doing these years might interest people in what led up 91, 92, what led up to 93, man.
Exactly.
It's a cool concept, dude. Interesting. That's the one thing. It's interesting. Like I said, anybody who grew up, especially anybody who grew up around this area, grew up on Memphis wrestling, I think you got a built-in audience, man.
Well, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Like I said, there's gonna be times throughout the year when Richard and Josh aren't available, and I'm gonna be looking for co-hosts who will watch the shows and then come on there and discuss it with me. So you're a knowledgeable guy when it comes to wrestling, and you're a funny guy. You're able to make things entertaining. So I may be looking at you for too long. I may send you an episode like, hey man, watch this and come be a co-host for me, dude. And we'll have you on there, and we'll talk about an episode. So
dude, I'm game, man.
Awesome.
Anything you want, just holler at me and we'll make it happen, dude. I'm all for it. I think it'd be fun as hell, man.
Absolutely. Well, all right, brother. Thank you for having me on, and you guys check out WrestleCopia.com.
Gene, you have a great night, my friend.
You too, buddy. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, you seen it right there. Gene Jackson, like I said, he's a wrestler, a comedian. He's a podcaster. Go check out this Retro Wrestling Review podcast, man. Like I said, they're in 1993 USWA right now. Go check it out. And go check out some of the main event comedy, man. Anything with Whitey Jenkins is funny as hell. Go check it out. Guys, we will be back next Tuesday night, 7 p.m. like always. Until then, I appreciate everybody who tuned in. I appreciate everybody who interacted. And y'all take it easy.
I don't ever slow up. No, I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that, spitting slow, spitting fast. I could roast, I could gas, think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past.
And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness. Hilarious, you think you're with my time, you're delirious. Mysterious, because you hide behind a fake exterior. Inferior, you know I'll always be a bit superior. Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag. I want you to hear words, you can say them back. I want you to feel free from the chains at last, and to believe in what you got, it was built to last, yeah.
Now that I've been put through hell, I never got anyone's help, I had to do it all myself.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.